I'm Robert McCready at Evening Magic on X, formerly known as Twitter. Shuly Cawood is a wife, a daughter, a sister, a Gen Xer, a teacher, a writer, a memoirist, a poet, a walker, runner, graduate from an MFA program at Queen's University of Charlotte, and has published 6 books. Shuly Cawood, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Robert. I love being here with you.
I'm glad that you're here. Where are you zooming us from?
I am zooming from Johnson City, Tennessee.
Oh, excellent. So, you've got a new book of poetry coming out.
I do. It's my second collection of poetry, and it's coming out with Press 53 this time,
And what date is it coming out?
September 26th, 2023.
Okay. We're filming maybe a week or so before then, but I think this will come out right around the time that the book gets released. So hopefully this will create some synergy. I just got done reading the poetry collection, and what I love about the poems, because I've also read three of your nonfiction works, is that your poems seem to be more nonfiction about your life. Are they all inspired by your life?
They have a lot of inspiration from my life, but they're not all nonfiction. So I will say that some of them have. I always tell people don't assume that the things that I write in a poetry collection or any poem are true. And it could be that none of it's true, but it sounds true, or that parts of it are true and then parts of it are made up. And so I love that. You're not the first person to say that. But a lot of it does draw from my life experience. Yes, definitely.
Your voice is very strong in these poems. And I know you in real life, and I've read a couple of your other books, and I can hear Shuli when I'm reading.
Oh, I'm so glad.
How hard was it to do that in the writing?
I don't think that it's something that I make an effort to do now. I think having worked on writing for all these years, that probably my voice has come through. I remember thinking about voice a long time ago, maybe probably pre-MFA program, which was over 10 years ago. I mean, not the MFA, but thinking about all this stuff. And I think that once a writer begins to not worry so much about how things are coming off in the page. Not that you don't worry about things being clear to a reader and all that and being edited, but to let just your true voice spill onto the page when you write. I think that a voice comes through for a writer if they allow it. I don't think it's something that at least I've had to work at. I think it's just been honed. It's something I've honed over time.
I should have asked you this before we started recording, but do you have a copy of your book near you?
I have it right in front of me. This is my only copy. I'm not sure you can see it with the blurry Zoom thing I have going on, but
A little bit.
there it is.
All right, good. I'm glad you've got it because there are some poems in there that I will ask you to read
Sure.
as I was going through it. But going back to what you said about voice, I was
Mhm.
listening to a Natalie Goldberg interview on the Paul Leslie Hour, and he and I have kind of teamed up and we've become sister podcasts. He's got a lot of subscribers and he's got a lot more experience than I do. And he used to be a radio show, but he's really cool. And he lives in Charleston and he interviews a lot of writers like Gene Wilder, Natalie Goldberg, and I can't remember his name. He
Wow.
wrote Forrest Gump, a lot of big names. And they give a lot of interesting insights. For
Mm.
instance, Forrest Gump, he wrote in 6 weeks and he didn't even know what he was writing when he did it. And Natalie Goldberg, he asked about writer's voice, and she said, "Oh, I never think about that. Just use your ordinary voice."
Hmm. I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that my ordinary voice, in my case, particular case, I don't know that my speaking voice is the same as my poetic voice or how I sound in writing. You'd probably be able to tell that better than me. But I do think that I probably have a distinct voice in writing. Um, People have told me that before.
It's, I think it's very close to your speaking voice. I
Interesting.
think it's very close, maybe a little bit more prayerful or kind of beseeching.
Mm.
That's kind
Interesting.
of the slight difference.
Yeah. Nice words, Robert. I like
Thank
those
you.
words.
Thank you. It's because your poems, they'll end where the epiphany is, and instead of an epiphany, you give a little lesson.
Interesting, really? Huh.
Mhm. I don't know if I picked out ones with the lessons at the end, but practicing, I think I picked out your food and dog poems.
I have a lot of food poems, apparently. I did not know that I wrote so many food poems until other people who read my work was like, God, you just always are writing about food. And I had no idea. I have a lot of food poems in here. It's really interesting. So I guess I have food on my mind.
Well, I liked this one, practicing. I want to hear you read that one because the
Sure.
only mention of food is a trip to the Harris Teeter.
Hmm. Practicing. Let me find it in here.
It's in the early part of the book.
Yep, I found it. Practicing. I drove alone from North Carolina to my Ohio hometown for Christmases. You and I always said we would celebrate sometime later. Those were the trips I learned to pay the toll for the car behind me on the West Virginia Turnpike, understanding then that small joys might be enough. One September weekend, I went to Boone with my girlfriends while you stayed back, played tennis with your friend whose name I can't remember, went drinking with another who liked that taqueria on the outskirts of Carborough, the two of you taking up a vinyl booth with your politics and beer. And my friends and I went to a bar in broad daylight, and someone convinced one of us to mount the mechanical bull and hold on tightly, when really the trick was to have one hand free. In November, a friend invited us to contra dance at a rec center 2 towns away. You said you wouldn't like the music, fiddle and guitar, so I pulled my hair back and went without you. 2 men asked my name. One had a silver wedding band, but the other had a steady swing and patient hands. I didn't return to that place for a long time, but knowing I could mattered. Sometimes I drove to Harris Teeter after work, filling the car with a tub of yogurt, bag of pretzels, a lone granola bar, my version of dinner if you did not cook. I think I always knew one day I would have to live without you, yet for so long I feared motorcycle accident, plane crash, freak heart attack. But hearts are not that complicated, and most of the time you can tell yours might be heading toward disaster. I paid my toll. I paid for those behind me. I told everyone we were fine, and I told myself Christmas didn't matter, that we would celebrate sometime later.
I like that one. I like your dinner in that because it's popular right now. It's called girl dinner. Have you heard of
Oh, I
this?
have heard of this. Yes, like eating snacks for
Yeah,
dinner, right? That are easy. You don't have to cook.
your
I'm all about not
pretzels,
cooking, believe me. Yeah, yes.
your pretzels and your yogurt. I loved that. And and to me, that's one of the poems that is a distinctly Gen X poem because you were not writing it as a reaction to girl dinner. You don't have the word girl dinner in there. It's just Shuly Cawood's dinner. And Gen X had this way of cutting through and and being their own people. They believed in being their own people. And they were against the man. They were against media, they were against politics, they were against corporations. And I think this poem still has that Gen X vibe because it just, like you're doing your own thing and you can go dancing on your own and but maybe things are going too far with these gentlemen that want to dance with you, so you're not going back there, like you're just doing your own thing. You're not Gen X was not reactionary the way that people
Mm,
are now.
yeah. I
And
think that's definitely true for the time period that I grew up. Yes, I would agree with that. And I think it's American culture to be independent, to strive to be independent and do things on one's own. But maybe it is more Gen X than the other generations. I don't know.
it is American culture,
Yeah.
but there is a collectivism that is happening that people are pointing out that Gen X is distinctly different from it. And also Gen X was a
Interesting.
small generation,
Mm,
but it's and I'm someone that they tried to take Gen X away from me and put me in with the millennials. And I've also heard that I'm an echo boomer because I'm born in 1984.
hmm.
And a generation is 20 years, but for some reason they cut it off at 15. So it ended at 1980. And so I'm not Gen X. I'm supposed to be a millennial or the term echo boomer. So my generation is, or my little piece of time is really thrown out there. But
Yeah.
um, one of the things that is American that the Gen X has that no one else has is being the apolitical. Oh, I don't really follow politics. Gen X is the last people that did that. Now there's not a person like that. And then you have the huge trends in social media,
Hmm.
and people are just reacting to it. Like I first heard about girls, what, um, girl supper. I forget what I called it, or
I
girl
forget what
dinner.
they call it. I read about it in the New York Times very recently. So I definitely hadn't heard of it when I wrote this poem, which I wrote a few years back. But I can't remember what it's called. It is something like that. I don't remember what it's called though.
I heard about it from a male comedian who impersonates Ina Garter. Is that her name? I didn't even know
Mm,
he was impersonating a food person, but there's this Northeastern food lady that always wears a blue shirt, and she is kind of posh
yeah.
and does things. And then so I was following him, and he has this signature music. I was following him. I thought he just made up a character, and then he did an impersonation of Martha Stewart, which was great. And she had the girl's food, and I was like, "Oh, he's so funny." And then just Friday, last Friday, I found out that he was impersonating a real cook, and they were like, "You didn't know?" I said, "No, I thought he was just doing his own."
Doing his thing. Yeah. I've got to see this video.
Yeah, I'll send you some. I see him on Instagram, and
Okay.
he's so funny because there's this trend of male um, female impersonators, and they're not drag queens. They just wear a wig and maybe lipstick, and they still have their stubble, and then they're impersonating famous women. So it's never like so it's not like a RuPaul's Drag Race. I'm impersonating
Right.
Liza Minnelli, and they're
Right.
made up. It's like a more like a comedy hour.
Right. Right.
And it's so funny because it's more about the little movements they make, and it's like,
Right. Right.
oh my god, that's so funny, that's just like it. But I'll send you some that's funny. um the other about There is a period of time in the 2000s, and I just found out this category is called hipness purgatory, and
Okay.
it's around indie, it's around that kind of area. But like Juno is a movie that has hypnus purgatory aesthetic. Everything with
Okay.
Michael Cera is what they say. It's got like a handcrafted quality about it. It's a mishmash of things. There's some
Okay.
cartoons in it. Um, Nothing is kind of casual. And there was one of your poems towards the end that
Hmm.
reminded me of hypnus purgatory.
Okay.
Just like the casual way of things. And I think it was your story here. Your story
Oh,
here.
yes.
You included
Yeah.
all the elements that you liked in a story. And I was like, I liked
Yes.
this is what I want to write a story too, and put this stuff in here. And then I realized Hypnus Purgatory puts those things in stories.
I'm not sure I understand hypnus purgatory, but I'm glad you liked the poem. That's
It's
fantastic.
it's what they have described the aesthetic as, like a movement. So if something is Baroque, or if something is WPA, or if something is Art Deco, it's got a style that you can see, and Hypnus
Right.
Purgatory is one of those. And I just discovered it, and
Okay.
you've seen it. And I
Okay.
like, did you just see the movie Juno?
Yes, of course.
Like
Yes.
all the songs, the way the movie's shot, the cover of the movie poster, that's all Hypnus Purgatory.
Okay.
And if you go
Well,
and look at it, you'll refresh your memory. You'll be like, oh, wow, everything was like that during that time period.
interesting.
Like
Okay.
block letters, hand drawn block
Right.
letters.
Okay. So a kind of, you're saying it's more without a style, like personal? Is that what you mean?
It seems personal. It does seem without a style. And I wouldn't have thought, oh, this is a movement. But now
Huh.
that people are looking back on it, they see it as a style movement.
Interesting.
And,
Hmm.
it just seemed, we called it indie when it was happening. Oh,
Right, right,
this is so
right.
cool. And then now looking back at it through that, what this poem does, the things that it adds in there, it seems like hypnotist purgatory, and it's more evidence for me that I am part of Generation X. Damn it, it's the cool generation. Anyway, I'd like to hear that poem.
Sure. Let's see your story here. I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story with no end. A story with a temper but a side of fruit. A story with a stutter, a sneeze, a slow burn. I want to tell you a story with lips and hips and a neck brace. A story with wisdom teeth and a bar of chocolate in its pocket and tricks and jacks and possibly an axe up its sleeve. A story with a trash can and torn raft and cracked coffee mug with a blue bowl of freshly washed kale. What I mean is a story that's saintly but with secrets, the binge watch of a bad series, a little weed, an affair that according to the story is over but never is. I want to tell you a story with flip-flops and tongs and that one trip to Texas when everyone drank too much tequila and no one paid the taxi driver, and that one time with the trapeze that everyone says couldn't possibly have happened, but everyone still believes. A story with no name, but with a little black book. A story with no address, but with plenty of postcards from women seeking apologies and from kids who still believe in Santa. A story with an alley, a yellow galley kitchen, a pocket knife, and wind chimes that sway on summer nights, no longer waiting to be asked to dance. A story with a heart murmur and strong legs, a beanbag chair and an old Polaroid, a snowblower and a rodeo-worthy sombrero. A story that comes with French fries and an open gate and a pond protected by 1,000 cattails. I want to tell you a story with no shame, a story with a seventh inning and broken glass, a steel bridge and an addiction, with a bandana, bikini, Birkenstocks. I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you with a lighter, a lashing out, a last kiss.
I like that.
Oh, I'm
I
glad you
think the
liked it.
Polaroid, that was like a hypnotist purgatory thing. And that's another one of the poems that doesn't have a lesson on it. And I
Yep,
think I wish that I had pulled one of those so that the audience knows what I'm talking about, but they can just get the book and see what I'm talking about themselves.
that's
Um,
true. I never
I
knew I wrote in lessons. I think since I write memoir, I think a lot of my poems tend to be memoir-like in the sense that I'm writing about insights that I have about my life or about things that I didn't have at the time. Um, and maybe that's what you're calling lesson. I don't know. Maybe you're talking about something different than what I'm talking about.
it's usually the last line, and to me, the way it reads, my interpretation is you're kind of affirming something with the speaker is affirming something within herself at the end of the poem. And that seems like a lesson that anybody can have. Um, but I think of them as
Yeah,
lessons rather than epiphanies.
interesting.
I have this book. Can you see it?
Yeah, what the fortune teller would have said. Yeah, that's the book that came out right before this one. This came out last December, 2022.
I love what the fortune teller would have said. I like the cover. I like the size. It's unusually shaped.
Yes.
And I love the way that every essay in it or story, we'll talk about how you would go about that, is told as if the fortune teller is giving you a reading.
I didn't think about that.
So, are these considered personal essays? Are they
Yes.
narrative nonfiction?
Yeah, they're a collection of flash uh, prose. So they're all they're 750 words or fewer. Some of them are much, much shorter than 750 words. But I submitted it for a prose contest. Well, actually, it was a contest for flash. So it could be fiction or nonfiction, but mine are all nonfiction. So that book is completely true. All of it is true. And so they're all flash essays. And it's a collection I hope that holds together.
It does hold together, and there is one thing that has stuck with me from this book
Hmm.
since I've read it, which I think it's been over a year, and it's when you had an apartment with a north-facing window or
Mm.
north-facing apartment.
Yeah, yes, I did. I absolutely
And
did.
and now when I walk through, I have an east-facing house, and I've
Mm,
got windows all over, I've got windows galore. And so I get a lot of sun. And since reading that, I was thinking about how the sun hits in houses. And I've heard that
mm,
south facing houses get the most sun. And as I walk through my neighborhood now, when the sun's striking a certain way, maybe if it
right.
hasn't gone down all the way in the evening, I think that's a north facing house. They're not getting any light in there. It's dark in there. And it's because your apartment was dark. And I
Yeah.
think if I lived there, would I spend more time on the porch?
Interesting. Yeah, it to me it was such a metaphor. I've always been, I don't know about always, but it definitely as a young adult and well into adulthood. And still I'm very aware of where the light falls and aware of having light or not having enough light. And part of that is because I always have plants. And so I'm always aware of their light needs. And at that time, I had just one wall of windows in my apartment. The other three walls, other facing walls, were interior. So I only had one um, set of windows basically, and they were all north facing. So I had to have certain plants because, a lot of plants need more light. But it was such a metaphor for that time because it was a very dark time in that part of my life. It was a difficult couple of years. So it worked well in terms of literature, I suppose, to have been north facing.
Right. Well, it certainly was a detail that stayed with me and that I carry into my life now that I think about
Mm.
that period of your life. Does it correspond with one of the poems in the new book? And I don't remember which one it was, but it was when you had a job that you didn't have to show up to work until 10 o'clock the next day after dancing.
No, although in that particular place I lived, I did have what did I have? I had windows on two ends of the house, on two ends of the condo that I lived in. So no, that was a different time period. That was a time period when I was living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I had a condo. And um God, I loved that job. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So there's a poem in the my collection that's called oh my gosh, it's bad that I can't think of it. It's talks about being up high, looking out on Franklin Street. Joy, I think is what it's called.
Oh, maybe it
Uh,
is Joy, and I do have it written down. It's before your story
yeah.
here.
Yes, Joy is the poem, but that wasn't when I was living in the north facing apartment. So,
Okay.
but that
Well,
is, there's a poem in the fortune teller would have said, I talk about how my ex and I had a kitchen with a tiny window that only let in a little bit of light. That's the same place as Joy, because he and I lived in that condo before we got divorced, and then I remained in that condo. Um, but different than the north facing apartment.
okay, yeah, I could pull those threads because it's like it creates a really interesting spatial awareness of Shuly Cawood reading your books, and I'm tracing them, and I'm not far from North Carolina, so I know these
Yeah.
areas. I've been contra dancing, so
Yeah.
I know that experience as well. Go ahead and read Joy for us, since we brought
Oh,
it up.
sure. Yeah, this poem. So for those people who do know Chapel Hill, it's written about being up on, oh gosh. This is my brain right now, not remembering the name of this place. It's called Top of the Hill. Pretty sure it's called Top of the Hill. I don't know if it's still there. I don't even know if I got the name right, but it's a rooftop restaurant slash bar that's on the corner of Franklin and Airport Road, which might now be at that part be called Martin Luther King. I'm not sure if on that part it's still called Airport. Joy. Up on a rooftop restaurant at the corner of Franklin and Airport Roads, the street lights stopping and starting the cars below, I drank more than I'd ever drunk before. I was leaving a job I had loved so long, a job that had loved me through my marriage and divorce, through days when my face was swollen with grief, a job that had combed my hair when I could not, a job that never said, "Have you considered makeup?" or "Did you look in the mirror before saying yes to that outfit?" A job that said, "Sure," when I declared I was going to Winston-Salem every Tuesday night to dance and would not get home until it was so late the highways would be empty save for truckers. And by the way, I won't be into work until 10 the next morning, a job that said, "As long as you come back." And I always did until that November when I said, "I'm bored. I need a change. I don't think I can do this anymore." Up on a rooftop restaurant, the chilled air made its way around the tables, and I flirted with strangers while my friends toasted my next step, except I didn't know what was next. Talking to no one was a man I had invited who would never love me. And I was free finally. And isn't that what I wanted? And isn't this what I asked for when I said I have to go? Joy was in the streetlight on the corner of Franklin and Airport Roads, turning green, yellow, red, and back again. And it seemed so close up there on that rooftop restaurant, close enough that if I leaned over the edge, I could almost touch it. Except once I leaned, I understood how far away it really was.
That's a lesson one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I think of it more as, or differently, I think of it as more like insight into something that I had an epiphany about or had again insight about later.
It's definitely an insight. It's not like a lesson, like an Aesop moral lesson. It's like
Right.
okay, sometimes you can't love anymore.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me. And it's like, well, this is what I learned. It's like talking to yourself. Like,
Right, right.
okay, well, sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're cracking me up, Robert.
Oh, that's good. Okay, your memoir,
Mm.
The Going and the Goodbye. Is
Hmm.
that it right?
The going and goodbye.
The Going and Goodbye. I always mess it up a little bit. But usually I'm like,
You're
this is
good.
Shuly. She wrote God and Goodbye. You're like, The Going and Goodbye.
I love that. Yeah.
I do it to all of my friends. Like my friend Sasser Hill, I think I called her book wrong. She's like, no, it's this. So when my book comes out, I'll experience that too.
That's
But
right.
I don't have a copy of that one anymore because Ghost loved that one.
She ate it up.
She ate it up, and there's certain glues I think and certain
Mhm.
pages um, would inspire that in her.
It's so
And
funny.
there's another, and I think that came from a UK press, right?
Right, right. Hmm.
There was another book that I had from a UK author, and she ate up that book too. So I think they might have a slightly different method over
Right, right.
there. But that's one of the best memoir I've ever read. It's one of the best books I've ever read.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's sweet.
And did you go to the MFA program to work on that book,
Yes.
or
Yes, I did. Yeah. So I had always thought that I would, well, I shouldn't say always. It's a big word. I had thought that I would get an MFA in poetry when I was in college, and I had planned to do an MFA in poetry to continue on with my studies, graduate studies, immediately after college, doing an MFA in poetry. And my professors basically talked me out of it, not because they didn't think my poetry wasn't good enough, but they said, go get some real world experience first. And so I applied for jobs and didn't get a job. And so ended up in graduate school studying journalism right after college, which was not anywhere in the plans. And I went to the Ohio State University. It was a very good program, but I didn't love it, not because of the program. It was not their fault, because I wanted to be, I kept seeing all the English students, you know, who were in graduate school at Ohio State, and I really wanted to be studying poetry. But anyway, that's a whole different story. My point is that I always thought that I would do an MFA in poetry. And then these years went on, I just gave up the whole idea of an MFA. It wasn't until around probably 2012 or 13 that I began to even consider an MFA again. And by that time, I was reading and writing a lot of memoir, and I wanted to get better at it. I was doing summer conferences where I'd go and learn a little bit over the summer, and then, you know, but it was learning at a very slow pace. And so I decided to go back, and I wanted to study memoir, personal essay, crafting creative nonfiction. And so I went back, and I particularly had already started writing the memoir, but I really wanted to finish it and make it a lot better. And so I did that over the program. When I graduated, I had a complete book. It needed an overhaul still, so I ended up overhauling it twice after I graduated. But I mean, through no fault of the program, I learned so much in that program, and it changed my writing, definitely for the better. I learned so much in that program, so I'll always be grateful. I feel like that made my first book a possibility, or a better possibility. Maybe that's a better way of saying it.
I studied fiction, and we got some lessons, and I can remember one little snippet that I learned, and it was always mention who the character is and where the character is as soon as possible. And I learned it my very last semester there, and I thought that I just spent all this money to learn that. And so so I'm wondering, what are some lessons about memoir that you learned or have learned?
Well, you mean through the MFA or in general?
Either.
Okay, I learned so much from Matthew Goodman, who I learned from him through the Antioch Writers Workshop. He was my teacher for several summers. And one of the big things he learned, which is the heart of memoir, and I'm sorry, the big things he taught me, which is the heart of memoir, is about reminiscent narrator or reflective voice. And it is having the voice of who you are now looking back on a time. A lot of people think that memoir is just retelling what happened to you, and that is only one layer of memoir. The more important layer is not only saying, here's what happened to me, but now here's this other layer, and I see everything that happened to me in this way versus that way. Back then I saw it this way, and now that I'm my age and I've gone through the years that I've lived, I see what happened in this totally different way, and here's what I gleaned from it that I didn't before. And so that is the reminiscent narrator talking. It's the reflective voice. It's having insight because of the wisdom that you've gained into your life, that you, whatever you experienced. And so that was huge. And I already knew that going into the MFA program. The MFA taught me a lot of smaller things, which I will try to think of off the top of my head, but I'm not sure that I can grab right now. But just so much about editing and cutting down and telling versus showing are a lot of the things I learned in the MFA program. But that reminiscent narrator, reflective voice, I can credit that completely to Matthew Goodman. He's a wonderful teacher and author.
So kind of instead of exposition, the exposition is you explaining the situation, how it was versus how it is now.
It's so it goes against the whole showing and telling. Like with showing, they say, don't explain what's happening, right? You just show the table, and you definitely use that in memoir. But there is some voice that comes through in memoir that says, now I understand that when this happened, I was experiencing this, or now looking back, I see that. Those are signals that you're getting the reminiscent narrator, the reflective voice. That's that insight. And that's it's telling what you understand now that you didn't understand then.
There's an element in fiction, or I shouldn't say element, a genre. And when I was in graduate school, I wrote about pseudo memoir, and it was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And they
Mm,
called that pseudo memoir because um, it was a fake memoir, but it was presented like a real memoir. And there are two
mm,
instances of reflective voice. And one of them that I remember is that she's at the beginning in the first chapter, she mentions having to do something with the kids. And then
mm,
she goes back to being a teenager.
mhm,
And then since then, that term has changed a little bit to like, I think now they say fictional memoir. Um, and it means different things. Sometimes there are novels that present as memoir.
right.
All there was one by Larry McMurtry, and it was "All my friends are going to be strangers," and there's just
Mm,
two lines in there that seems like he's writing about the past and
interesting.
not the story. And but I think that novel's all fiction.
Right.
And then there are so I don't know if that would be as I think of it as a pseudo memoir because it's a novel that seems like it's someone telling a memory.
Right. Right. If it's presented as memoir, I mean, not presented to the public, but it reads like you're a memoir, then I would assume that's, I don't even know what they'd call that, but that is a work of fiction. It's a novel.
The thing that I've been playing with for a while is autofiction,
Mm,
and it is almost all true. I think it might be all true, but it's presented, you cut out all the reflective voice.
mm,
And so
mhm.
it reads like fiction the very first time.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
Gloria Naylor's novel 1996 is actually a novella, and it's been called autobiographical novel, and it's also
Mm,
been called pseudo memoir. I
okay.
think people call it pseudo memoir because they're a little scared of things that she talked about there. But the people that are believing Gloria Naylor, they will call it autobiographical novel.
Hmm.
And one of the things that she changed is that she made two characters into one character in the story. In real life, it was
Right,
two people. So that is, but Gloria Naylor was doing something that wasn't being done when she
right.
wrote that one. So that was an interesting thing. I just have been thinking about memoir. I've never read a memoir craft book, and I like
Mm,
writing memoir. And I'm thinking, do I want to go down the rabbit hole of memoir craft books? Because I read all of them on fiction. So I don't know if
interesting.
I want to do that. What is the best memoir you've ever read?
Well, I don't know about best, but my favorite is probably Truth and Beauty by Anne Patchett.
Was that her first book?
No, I don't know if it's her first memoir. It might be her only memoir. I only know of her other not no, she has other nonfiction books, but they're collections of essays. So Truth and Beauty is about her and her friendship with Lucy Greeley, who was a poet. And so it's about their friendship. So it's their love story, really. Um, and about their, it's about Anne Patchett, how she came to be a writer. And I love that book. And I'm not, when I say I don't know if it's the best memoir, because I'm not saying, I mean, I love the way it's written. That's one of my favorite things, but I don't want to say like all the other memoirs that I've read are not as well written, or, it's the one that is probably my favorite, though. I just find it to be a really beautiful book. And maybe because I'm a writer, but I also liked hearing about our friendship, and it was a complicated friendship in many ways. And I think when you have complications, it makes something much more interesting than when it's just sort of vanilla.
Right, you're definitely right. And she's the one that owns the bookstore in Nashville, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I found out recently that she wrote a novel and published it before she was ever in the Iowa Writers Program, Iowa
I did
Writers
not know
Workshop.
that. Really?
Yeah. And because a friend of mine, he used
I
to
did not
run
know
a
that.
book blog, and his name is Matthew Turbyville. And he said, and he knows everything about books, and he worked at some famous bookstore in Boston. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. Sorry, book people. It might be called Book People. That's what it is.
There you go. There you
But
go.
he said, just to let you know how hard it is to get into Iowa, Ann Patchett wrote and published a novel before she was ever in the program.
Really?
Yeah, that
That
seemed
strikes me as
unbelievable.
odd because she went straight from undergrad to grad, I thought. So I didn't know that about her. So I just learned something new. I did not
Well,
know.
and it was told to me, and I don't know. This is part of what memoir is. Maybe people misremember it. It creates
I
misquality.
don't know. I did not hear that though, that she'd already published a novel.
I
It
read
could
I
be
read a
true.
book recently called Reframe Your Brain by Scott Adams, and he says that all of history is imaginary. So it just lives in
Wow.
our imagination now,
Maybe
and our
so.
imagination can do anything. So we're getting towards the end of the interview, and Paul Leslie, at the end of the interview, always turns over the microphone, so to speak, to the guest, so that the guest can say what is ever on her heart or her mind for everyone to hear for generations to come. So now, Shuly,
No pressure.
no pressure. The microphone is yours. Do what you got to do.
Oh, well, I would say that what I would like to tell people, whether you're a writer or a reader, is that I feel like no book gets made in a vacuum, that it requires, even though I'm the one doing the writing, that it requires a lot of people. Um, and some people who are not part of the book industry at all think it's just as easy as you just write a book and it just pops out, right? Next thing you know, it's you find a publisher, it's easy, you just send it in and you're done. But it's a huge, long process. And the process involves not only um, finding a publisher, writing query letters, but then working with an editor closely on editing the book. And then you have to proof it with the editor. And then it's a long, long, long process. It can be tedious, it can be wonderful, it can be hard. But I want to say thank you to all the people who helped me write this book, because I've had a lot of really wonderful people help. And then, of course, I have all these life experiences that feed into my writing, and poor things. Some people had to get written about over and over, like my poor ex-husband has been written about more times than he is, I'm sure, aware of. And so all the people who are in my life who sometimes end up in work, that must be hard. And so I give them thank yous. So
Thank you, Shuly Cawood.
thank you, Robert. Thanks for doing this. Thank you for contributing to the writing community and supporting my work and the work of other authors. That's huge. You've got a wonderful personality. I've always told you is full of light, and I love that about you. You always bring a spark to everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That feels really good to hear. I appreciate it.